December 1945. Upper Egypt. A farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Samman is digging at the base of a cliff called Jabal al-Tarif, searching for soft soil to fertilize his crops. His mattock hits something hard. He thinks it is a rock. He clears away the dirt. It is not a rock. It is a sealed clay jar almost a meter tall, its mouth plugged with a bowl of hardened bitumen. And it is not alone. There are 12 jars in total, buried under the Egyptian sun, in a landscape so remote that no one passes through it without a reason. Muhammad Ali hesitates. Local legend says these jars sometimes contain spirits. He stands over them, weighing fear against the chance of gold. Then greed wins. He raises his mattock and smashes one open. No gold, no spirits. What comes out is a spray of loose papyrus leaves, bound into leather-covered books, glinting faintly gold in the winter light only because of their age. He is disappointed. He gathers them up anyway, wraps them in his robe, and takes them home on his camel. His mother uses some of the pages as kindling for the cooking fire. The pages she burns that morning contain ideas so dangerous that the most powerful religious institution in the history of the Western world spent over 1,000 years trying to erase them from the earth. Ideas so radical that when they were finally translated and read in the 20th century, they rewrote what scholars thought they knew about the origins of Christianity, about the origins of the Bible, about the origins of God himself, because the pages in those jars do not describe a God who is good. They describe a God who is a mistake. To understand what was in those jars, you need to understand a single thought, just one. Everything else in this story flows from it. The God who made the world is not the true God. Read that again. Not there is no God. Not God is imperfect. The claim is more specific and far more disturbing than either of those. The claim is this: the being who created the universe, who crafted the stars and the mountains and the oceans and every living creature, who handed down the laws and the commandments, who demanded worship and sacrifice and obedience from the beginning of recorded time, that being is not actually God. He is a lesser thing, an accident, a blind and arrogant impostor who does not even know there is something infinitely greater than himself above him. And the real God? The real God has never once interfered with the world. The real God does not hand down commandments, does not demand sacrifice, does not flood civilizations or rain fire on cities. The real God is so far beyond this world that the world itself is essentially a mistake made by someone who had no idea what they were doing. Now pause and feel what that actually means. Every war fought in God's name, every child sacrificed on an altar, every earthquake called an act of God, every plague, every famine, every century of suffering endured because God willed it. According to the people who wrote those pages in Muhammad Ali's jar, all of that was not the will of the true God. It was the will of a failed, lesser being who cannot even conceive of anything higher than himself. The people who believed this were called Gnostics. They lived in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries of the Common Era. They were not a fringe cult on the edge of civilization. At their peak, they nearly took over what we now call Christianity from the inside. One of their greatest teachers came within a single vote of becoming the Bishop of Rome, the position we now call Pope. The church that emerged from that struggle spent the next 2 centuries hunting down every Gnostic text, every Gnostic community, every record of every Gnostic idea, and destroying it. So completely that by the Middle Ages, most people had no idea Gnosticism had ever existed at all, until a farmer in Egypt smashed open a clay jar. Before we go into the myth, before we meet the God who thinks he is God, you need to know who the Gnostics actually were, because the popular picture is completely wrong. The word Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, which simply means knowledge. Not knowledge in the sense of memorizing facts, knowledge in the sense of direct personal experience of something true. The kind of knowing you feel in your chest, not just in your head. The Gnostics were people who believed that direct, personal knowledge of the divine was possible, and that this knowledge, once gained, was the key to escaping the world's trap. They emerged in the first century of the Common Era, almost certainly in Syria and Egypt, in the swirling cultural mix of Jewish mysticism, Greek philosophy, and the earliest forms of Christian teaching. They were not a single organized religion. They were dozens of competing schools and teachers, all sharing a few core convictions but disagreeing fiercely about the details. Jewish mysticism gave them the raw material. Centuries of rabbinical tradition had already produced deeply strange speculations about the nature of God, the creation of the world, and the divine beings surrounding the throne of the Almighty. Certain traditions described the creator of the physical world as a being distinct from the highest God. That seed was in the soil long before Gnosticism bloomed. Greek philosophy gave them a framework. Plato, 3 centuries before Christ, had described the material world as a pale and flawed copy of a perfect, spiritual realm of pure forms. He had described a being called the Demiurge, a craftsman god who shaped the material world out of pre-existing matter. He was not the highest god. He was a builder working from a blueprint he did not design. The Gnostics took that Platonic architecture and filled it with something Plato never imagined, a mythology of tragedy, rescue, and betrayal. Early Christianity gave them the urgent question that held it all together. If Jesus came to save the world, what exactly is being saved? From what? By whom? The earliest Christians were not a unified block of believers. They were a thunderstorm of competing ideas about who Jesus was, what he actually taught, and what his death and resurrection meant. The Gnostics were one voice in that storm, arguably the most radical and certainly the most philosophically sophisticated. What they built from those 3 ingredients is one of the most extraordinary creation myths in human history. And it begins not with darkness, not with void, not with nothing. It begins with fullness. Imagine a light so complete that it is beyond light, a silence so full that it is beyond sound, a being so whole that it contains everything that could ever exist, without beginning and without end. The Gnostics called this the monad, the one, the true Father, the invisible Spirit. They piled name after name on it precisely because no single name could contain it. This being does not create. It does not command. It does not demand anything from anyone. It simply is in a state of absolute perfection, and from the sheer overflow of that perfection, it radiates. Like light from a sun too bright to look at, the monad radiates out divine beings called aeons. Each aeon is a living aspect of the divine nature, a kind of thought or quality of the true God made into a conscious entity. They exist in pairs, masculine and feminine, thought and expression, and depth and silence. Together they form a realm called the Pleroma, a Greek word meaning fullness or completeness. Everything in the Pleroma is perfect. Everything in it is divine. Nothing is lacking. Nothing is broken. The Pleroma contains 30 aeons in the most detailed version of this mythology, arranged in descending pairs from the closest to the monad down to the outermost edge of the divine realm. Each one is a little less direct, a little less radiant than the one above it, like ripples moving outward from the center of a pond. The outermost pair of aeons are the ones who matter most to this story. Their names, in the Greek tradition, are Christos and Sophia. He is anointed, chosen, connected to the divine center. She is wisdom itself, the living embodiment of the knowledge of God. Sophia has a problem. She wants to know the monad, not just to know of it, the way all the aeons do, basking in its reflected light. She wants to comprehend it fully, directly, on her own, without going through her partner aeon, without going through the established order of the divine hierarchy. She wants to know the unknowable. That desire, that single act of longing for something she was not meant to grasp alone, is what breaks the universe. Sophia's desire grows inside her like a fire. In the versions of this myth that survive in the Nag Hammadi texts, particularly in the text called the Secret Book of John, she does not plan what happens next. She does not intend catastrophe. She reaches toward the monad without her partner, without permission, without understanding what reaching for something you cannot contain actually does to you. And something comes out of her. It is not a thought. It is not an intention. It is a consequence. The moment she grasps for what she cannot hold, something spills out of her like a wound. It is formless. It has the vague shape of a face and the rudimentary outline of something living, but it is grotesque, imperfect, and incomplete. It is a being born from spiritual ambition that overreached itself. Sophia looks at what she has produced and is horrified. She does not want it. She does not claim it. She wraps the thing in a luminous cloud to hide it, to keep it away from the rest of the Pleroma so that her failure will not be seen. And then she throws it out. She casts it downward, into the empty space below the divine realm, the formless void beneath everything that is real and good. The thing falls into the void alone. And this is where the story becomes genuinely terrifying. Because the thing Sophia discards, the unformed accident of her overreaching desire, does not die in the void. It lives, it grows, it becomes self-aware. It looks around at the vast emptiness surrounding it and draws a conclusion. There is nothing above me. There is nothing greater than me. I am the only God. Its name, in the Sethian tradition of Gnosticism, is Yaldabaoth. Some texts call it Saklas, meaning fool. Others call it Samael, meaning blind God. The names are not flattering. They are not meant to be. Sophia watches from above, hidden in her cloud of shame. She sees the thing she made. She sees it declare itself supreme. She sees it believe, completely and without question, that it is the highest power in existence because it cannot perceive anything above it. And she begins to understand the magnitude of what she has done. Something of her own divine nature is inside Yaldabaoth. When he came out of her, some of her light came with him. The divine spark of wisdom is trapped inside a being that does not know what wisdom is. And Yaldabaoth is about to start building. The first thing Yaldabaoth creates is not the world. The first thing he creates is company. From his own power, from the overflow of his arrogance and the stolen light of Sophia inside him, he produces 12 beings. In some versions of the myth, they are 7, corresponding to the 7 known planets of the ancient world. In the fuller versions, they are 12, corresponding to the months of the year and the signs of the zodiac. They are called archons, from the Greek word for rulers. Each one governs a sphere of existence, a layer of the cosmos arranged like the shells of an onion around what will eventually become the earth. Yaldabaoth looks at his archons, and he is pleased. He is their father. He is their God. He instructs them to call him Lord and to give him worship, and they do because they know nothing else. Then Yaldabaoth creates the material universe. He fashions it from the dark matter of the void, shaping it with the divine light he does not know he has stolen. He creates the heavens and the earth. He creates the seas and the dry land. He creates every creature that swims and crawls and flies. He does all of this in a state of absolute certainty that he is the greatest power in existence. Then, in an act that will unravel everything he has built, he makes a declaration. The Apocryphon of John, one of the central texts discovered at Nag Hammadi, records the exact words. Yaldabaoth raises himself up, looks out over his new creation, and announces, "I am a jealous God, and there is no other God beside me." The Gnostics who wrote that line were not quoting it casually. They were quoting the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 5, the exact words God spoke from Mount Sinai to Moses. And they were pointing out something that stops you cold the moment you hear it. Why would the highest God, the infinite and all-knowing creator of everything, feel jealous? What is there to be jealous of? What is there to be afraid of? A God who is truly alone at the top of existence has nothing to envy and no reason to demand that no other gods be placed before him, because there are none. But what if there are? What if the very act of declaring, "There is no other God beside me," is the evidence that there is? That Yaldabaoth says this not from confidence but from fear, because something in the divine light he carries inside him, something of Sophia's wisdom that he does not understand, makes him vaguely, persistently, terrifyingly aware that he is not what he thinks he is. He cannot see the Pleroma above him, but he can feel its shadow, and it frightens him. The Gnostics found their proof of Yaldabaoth's fear in a single line from the book of Genesis. Before the creation of Adam, the text says that the Spirit of God moved over the face of the waters. The Gnostics asked a simple question: if Yaldabaoth created everything, who put the waters there? And what is the Spirit moving over them? Is it Yaldabaoth? If so, why does Genesis need to name it separately? Their answer: it is not Yaldabaoth at all. It is Sophia, still watching from above, still trying to retrieve the divine light trapped inside her creation. The water is a reflection of the light above, and Sophia's image appears in it like a face glimpsed in a still pool. When Yaldabaoth sees the image, he is transfixed. Something in it triggers that vague, frightened awareness inside him. He does not understand what he is seeing. He does not know it is his own mother looking down at him through the reflection. But the image in the water is of something so much greater than anything he has made that it produces, for the first and only time, a flicker of humility in him. And then a voice comes, not from the water. From far above the Pleroma's outermost edge, from the very source of the monad, a voice descends through all the divine layers and reaches Yaldabaoth with a single command. The voice says, "Make a human being." Yaldabaoth tells his archons. Together they craft a body, using all the aspects of their own natures, one archon contributing each element. They build a creature of extraordinary complexity, with a face that mirrors the image they saw reflected in the water, but when they are finished, the creature lies motionless. It cannot move, it cannot breathe, it cannot live, because none of them have what it takes to make something truly alive. They have dark matter and divine craft and the stolen light of Sophia, but they do not have the one thing a living being needs. They do not have the breath of the true God. And so Yaldabaoth does the thing that destroys him. He leans down over the body he has made, and he breathes into its face. When Yaldabaoth breathes into Adam, the divine light that was trapped inside him from Sophia flows out. It enters Adam with his breath, and lights Adam from within. The creature shudders, opens its eyes, rises, and Adam is, in that first moment of consciousness, more divine than his creator. Yaldabaoth looks at what he has done, and the fear comes flooding back. Adam is luminous. Adam is animated by divine light, real divine light, the kind that connects all the way back to the Pleroma, all the way back to the monad. Adam can perceive things that Yaldabaoth cannot. Adam has the potential for the true gnosis, the true knowledge of the divine that Yaldabaoth will never possess. The archons see it too, and they are frightened. They throw Adam into the material world. They dress him in flesh, covering his luminous spiritual body in a coat of matter that dims his perception. They give him a life that ends in death, a memory that begins at birth, and a vision that cannot see past the surface of things. They put him in a garden. They surround him with beauty and pleasure and everything he could need so that he will not think to look upward. Then they give him one command: do not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In the Gnostic reading, this command is not protective. It is not God shielding his beloved creation from harm. It is a warden issuing an instruction to a prisoner. The tree of knowledge is gnosis. The knowledge of good and evil, of the true nature of the cosmos, of Yaldabaoth's limitations and the Pleroma's existence, is the one thing that can set Adam free, and Yaldabaoth knows it. He puts the tree in the center of the garden and forbids it, not because eating from it will harm Adam, but because eating from it will save him. Then he makes Adam's companion Eve from Adam's own divine light, not from a rib, in the Gnostic myth's deepest version, from Adam's radiance. Eve does not merely share Adam's nature, she amplifies it. She is, in several of the Nag Hammadi texts, the one who wakes Adam to his true nature in the first place. She is not a helper added as an afterthought. She is the instrument of the rescue that Sophia has been preparing ever since she threw Yaldabaoth into the void, because Sophia has not been idle. In the book of Genesis, the serpent tempts Eve into eating the forbidden fruit, and this act is the fall of man, the original sin, and the catastrophe that condemned all humanity. The Church built its doctrine of human corruption on this story. The Gnostics read the same story and saw something completely different. In the Gnostic text called On the Origin of the World and in the Hypostasis of the Archons, which are both found among the Nag Hammadi texts, the serpent in the garden is not the villain. The serpent is Sophia's instrument. Some versions identify it directly with a divine being of wisdom sent from above to do the one thing that can restore humanity's lost knowledge. The serpent comes to Eve, not to tempt her, to teach her. It tells her what Yaldabaoth does not want her to know. It tells her that the tree is not dangerous, that eating from it will not bring death, that Yaldabaoth's command to avoid it is not protection but suppression, that the knowledge inside the tree is precisely what she and Adam need to understand who they are and where they truly come from. Eve eats. She gives some to Adam. Adam eats. And here is what actually happens in the Gnostic version. Their eyes open, not to shame, not to the horrible awareness of their nakedness in the way the conventional reading implies. Their eyes open to gnosis. They perceive, for the first time, the layers of the cosmos above them. They understand, dimly at first, that the being who made this garden and issued this command is not the highest God, that there is something above him that is calling to them, that the light inside them has a source far beyond this world. Yaldabaoth's response in the Gnostic reading confirms everything. He is not grieved. He is not heartbroken that his beloved children have disobeyed him. He is enraged and afraid because they now know what he has worked so hard to prevent them from knowing. He curses them. He drives them from the garden. He multiplies their suffering deliberately, not as justice, but as containment. If they suffer enough, they will not have the luxury of looking upward. But it is too late. The knowledge is in them, and it will not leave. Before we get to what happens next, you need to understand the Gnostic picture of the cosmos, because it changes everything about what living in this world means to them. The Earth, in the Gnostic model, sits at the center of a series of concentric spheres. Each sphere is governed by one of the archons, those beings Yaldabaoth created at the beginning. In the 7 archon version, they correspond to the 7 planets visible to the naked eye: the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Each archon has a nature, a name, and a personality. Each one embodies a kind of spiritual flaw. The Moon archon controls the realm of shifting illusion and unreliable change. Mercury governs crooked thought and dishonesty. Venus rules possessive desire. The Sun archon controls pride and the need to be seen. Mars rules violence and aggression. Jupiter governs arrogance and false authority. Saturn, the outermost, is Yaldabaoth himself, the lord of time and limitation, the one who makes sure nothing escapes. A human soul, when it dies, does not simply pass into the presence of God. In the Gnostic understanding, the soul rises upward through these spheres on its journey toward the divine realm. And at each sphere, the archon of that level stops it. The archon demands a toll, a password, a proof of identity. And if the soul cannot produce them, if it does not know the right formulas, the right names, the right responses, it is sent back down. It is reincarnated, returned to the flesh, returned to forgetting, returned to another lifetime of being trapped. This is why the Gnostics were so obsessed with knowledge. Gnosis was not merely spiritually desirable, it was practically necessary. Knowing the true nature of the cosmos, knowing the names of the archons, knowing the passwords that would get you past each one, was the difference between escaping this world and being recycled back into it indefinitely. The Nag Hammadi texts contain the actual passwords, instructions for exactly what to say to each archon at each sphere, word by word, so that the soul can pass through and continue upward. These are not metaphors. The people who wrote these things believed them the way a soldier believes in their mission briefing. This is practical theology, a survival manual for the journey home. And home is not the material world. Most people assume that Gnosticism is a form of Christianity, or a version of it, or a deviation from it. The reality is harder to categorize than that. Gnosticism predates the consolidated form of Christianity that emerged from the Council of Nicaea. Some Gnostic schools existed before Christianity at all. And the Gnostic understanding of Jesus is so different from the Orthodox understanding that calling it Christian requires redefining the word significantly. For the Gnostics, Jesus is not the son of the Demiurge. He is not sent by Yaldabaoth. He does not come to fulfill the law that Yaldabaoth handed down to Moses. He is a messenger from the true God, the monad, descending through the archon-controlled spheres and into the material world specifically to wake human beings up to what they are and where they came from. He comes to give gnosis, not to die for sins. The concept of sin in the Gnostic framework is almost entirely irrelevant because sin implies breaking a law, and the law was given by Yaldabaoth, and Yaldabaoth is not the true God. So his laws carry no ultimate authority. The idea that you can offend the true God by eating the wrong food or sleeping with the wrong person would have seemed bizarre to most Gnostics. The true God is not watching your behavior with a ledger. The true God is calling you home. What Jesus brings is information, revelation, the secret truth of the cosmos that the archons have suppressed. In the Gospel of Thomas, found at Nag Hammadi, Jesus does not perform miracles or die on a cross. He speaks in riddles and in sayings, and almost every saying is aimed at one thing, waking the listener to their own divine nature. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. That is saying 70 from the Gospel of Thomas. No atonement, no sacrifice, no priest required. The divinity is already inside you. The question is whether you will recognize it. For a significant strand of Gnostic thought called Docetism, from the Greek word meaning to seem, Jesus did not even have a real body. He only appeared to be physical. Because the true God cannot be trapped in flesh, cannot genuinely suffer and die in matter, the crucifixion was an illusion. In one Nag Hammadi text called the Apocalypse of Peter, Jesus laughs from above the cross while something that looks like him hangs dying below. The body is not him, it never was. For other Gnostic schools, Christ and Jesus are two separate beings, the divine Aeon Christ descending and entering the man Jesus at his baptism and departing before the crucifixion. The dove that descends at the Jordan is not a symbol, it is Christ arriving. The cry of desolation from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" is not despair. It is the literal moment of departure, Christ leaving the body before its death because the true God does not die in matter. These ideas are not footnotes in Gnostic theology. They are the center of it. And the man who came closest to installing them at the heart of what became the Roman Catholic Church was a brilliant Alexandrian teacher named Valentinus, and his story is one of the most extraordinary near misses in religious history. Around the year 136 of the Common Era, a teacher arrived in Rome from Alexandria in Egypt. His name was Valentinus, and he was, by any measure, remarkable. He was a poet. He was a philosopher. He was a preacher with a gift for speaking about the divine that people who heard him could not stop talking about. He brought with him a fully developed system of Gnostic mythology, richer and more intricate than anything that had been taught in Rome before, and he presented it not as a rival to Christianity, but as its deepest and most complete expression. He said he had received his teaching from a figure called Theodas, who had been a disciple of the Apostle Paul himself. Whether that lineage was real or invented, it was persuasive. Valentinus was not a secret society leader. He was not hiding in catacombs. He taught publicly. He built a school. He gathered students, including some of the most educated and philosophically sophisticated people in Rome. He shaped the thinking of a generation. He also campaigned for the position of bishop. The Bishop of Rome in this period was not yet the supreme head of a global institution, but the position already carried enormous weight. Valentinus did not get it. According to a much later account by a church writer named Tertullian, he lost by a single vote and left the church in anger. Whether that account is accurate is impossible to confirm, but the fact that a teacher who believed the creator of the world was a blind, arrogant lesser being came within a vote of leading Rome's Christian community tells you everything about how early and how radical this split in Christian thinking actually was. Valentinus returned to teaching and developed his system further. He described the Pleroma in its most detailed form. He gave the aeons names and relationships and individual personalities. He told the story of Sophia's fall with a poet's ear for grief and consequence. His students wrote some of the most beautiful texts in the Nag Hammadi collection, including the Gospel of Truth, which reads less like a theological treatise and more like a meditation on what it feels like to wake up from a nightmare into love. The Valentinian school survived its founder's death and flourished into the 3rd century, particularly in Alexandria, where the merging of Greek philosophy and religious mysticism had the deepest roots. They conducted their own rituals. They developed their own understanding of baptism and the Eucharist, in which the physical elements were understood not as themselves sacred but as symbols pointing toward the Pleroma above. They were, in every meaningful sense, a parallel Christianity, asking the same questions Christianity asked but arriving at radically different answers. And they were not the only school doing so. The Gnostic movement was never one thing. It was a family of overlapping ideas, competing schools, and brilliant individual teachers who agreed on the broad architecture of the cosmos but fought bitterly about the details. The Sethians took their name from Seth, the 3rd son of Adam and Eve, whom they identified as the carrier of the divine spark through human history. In their mythology, Seth is not a minor biblical figure. He is a messianic being who descends repeatedly into the world in different forms to rescue the spiritual seed, the scattered divine light, from the trap of matter. In some Sethian texts, Christ is simply the most recent incarnation of Seth. The line of prophets and redeemers across human history are all the same divine being, returning in different shapes to accomplish the same task. The Sethians produce some of the most cosmologically elaborate texts in the Nag Hammadi library, the 3 stelas of Seth, Allogenes. Zostrianos, which is so philosophical that it seems to have overlapped with the Neoplatonic school of the philosopher Plotinus in Rome, and Plotinus actually held seminars specifically to argue against it. The Sethians were not intellectually isolated. They were in direct conversation with the most sophisticated philosophical tradition of the ancient world. Then there was Basilides, teaching in Alexandria around the same time as Valentinus, who described a cosmos of 365 heavens, one for each day of the year, each one ruled by its own archon. His universe was so vast and so layered that it makes the standard Gnostic model look modest. Basilides taught that Jesus was not crucified at all. Simon of Cyrene, the man the Gospels say carried Jesus' cross to Golgotha, was the one who actually died. Jesus, in Basilides' version, stood in the crowd and watched and laughed, because the archons who thought they were executing the divine messenger executed a random bystander instead. There was also Marcion of Sinope, who is sometimes grouped with the Gnostics, though he would probably have objected. Marcion's position was clean and brutal. The God of the Old Testament and the God of Jesus are not the same being. The God of the Old Testament is real, is the creator of the world, but he is a lesser, vengeful, justice-obsessed God, while the Father that Jesus calls to is a higher, entirely loving God who was previously unknown to humanity. Marcion did not develop a full Gnostic cosmology, but his core rejection of the Old Testament God was so radical that the mainstream church expelled him, and his movement spread across the Roman Empire and lasted for centuries. What all these schools shared was the conviction that the world as it is, as we experience it every day, with its violence and its disease and its injustice and its death, is not the product of a good God working a good plan. It is a mistake, and the purpose of religious life is not to serve the mistaken Creator, but to find the way back past him to whatever made him possible. Of all the texts in the Nag Hammadi library, the one that contains the most complete version of the Gnostic myth is the Apocryphon of John, which means the secret book of John. 4 different versions of it survive, 2 at Nag Hammadi and 2 elsewhere. This is the text that tells you everything, from the monad to the fall of Sophia to the creation of Adam to the escape of the soul through the archon spheres in a single sustained narrative. The frame of the story is simple. After the resurrection, the Apostle John is walking in the temple in Jerusalem when a Pharisee confronts him and mocks him for following a deceiver. John, shaken, goes alone into the desert to pray and meditate, asking the questions that he cannot answer. Who is the Father? What is the aeon to which we belong? What is the eternal realm? And then the sky opens. A being appears to John, shifting between three forms: an old man, a young man, a woman. It is, it tells him, the Father, the Mother, and the Son. It is the Christos, come to reveal the truth that the world has been hiding. And it tells him everything: the invisible spirit, the barbello, the first emanation, the divine feminine at the top of the Pleroma, the progressive unfolding of aeon after aeon, the bliss and the completeness of the divine realm. Then the crack in it, Sophia's longing, the thing that comes out of her. The text gives Yaldabaoth a face. He has the face of a lion and the body of a serpent, and he moves through the void with a terrible, wrong-headed confidence. He creates his archons and names them and assigns them their spheres. He creates the material world. He sees the image of the true God reflected in the primordial waters and instructs his archons to make a being in that image. They form Adam from each of their own qualities. 136 angels contribute to the construction of the human body, each one responsible for a different part, a different organ, a different system. The body lies on the ground, incapable of movement for a long time, because none of them have the power to animate it. Then Sophia, watching from above, sends a message down through the divine hierarchy. A kind of trick. She flatters Yaldabaoth. She tells him that if he breathes his spirit into the face of Adam, Adam will rise and Yaldabaoth's glory will be made manifest. Yaldabaoth, too proud and too simple to recognize the trap, does it. Adam rises. The divine light pours from Yaldabaoth into Adam. Adam, newly awakened, is brighter than his maker. Yaldabaoth and the archons see it and react with the visceral panic of someone who has been outplayed. They take Adam and throw him into the lowest part of the material world. They cover his luminous body with matter. They create the experience of time, which makes his consciousness finite, and the experience of forgetting, which makes his history invisible to him. Then they create Eve. In the secret book of John's telling, Eve is not made from Adam's rib. She is made from the light of the divine feminine that is still active in Adam, the portion of Sophia's wisdom that came through Yaldabaoth's breath. Eve is the externalized spiritual body of Adam, his divine nature made visible in a companion form. Yaldabaoth sees Eve and wants to possess her. He assaults her. In some versions of this text, the language is explicit and disturbing and deliberate. The ruler of this world's relationship to the divine feminine in humanity is one of violation and possession, not love. The offspring of that assault become a part of the chain of human generation that continues to this day, mixed with the divine light, always partly of this world and partly of the one above. Sophia sends an instruction down into the garden through the serpent. The serpent tells Eve the truth about the tree. Eve and Adam eat. They are expelled from the garden. And Yaldabaoth, furious, creates the entire system of suffering we know as mortal life: toil, disease, the pain of childbirth, the inevitability of death. These are not punishments from a loving father. They are the instruments of a frightened warden. But the light is already in Adam. It is already in Eve. It is already in every human being born from that line, and the true God has not abandoned it. The Nag Hammadi library consists of 13 leather-bound codices, a word for early book forms as opposed to scrolls, containing 52 separate texts. They are written in Coptic, the Egyptian language of the early Christian period, but they are almost certainly translated from earlier Greek originals. They were copied sometime in the 4th century of the Common Era, probably between 350 and 400. The collection is not homogeneous. It is a library in the truest sense, assembled by someone who was reading widely across a tradition. Some texts are purely Gnostic mythology, others are philosophical meditations. A few are so abstract that they read almost like pure mathematics applied to divinity, and a small number, the Gospel of Thomas chief among them, do not fit neatly into any category. The Gospel of Thomas contains 114 sayings attributed to Jesus, not stories, not miracles, not a passion narrative, just sayings, most of them beginning with the phrase, Jesus said. Many of them have no parallel in the four canonical Gospels, and some of them are so strange and so compressed that scholars have been arguing about what they mean since the day they were first translated. Split a piece of wood. I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there. The divine is not above the world. The divine is inside it, in the most ordinary materials of daily life, waiting to be recognized. The Gospel of Philip is almost as strange, a collection of meditations on ritual and relationship that treats the sacraments of the Church as symbolic doorways toward a truth that the literal-minded cannot see. Philip is also the text that contains what may be the most controversial line in the entire library, a statement about Jesus and Mary Magdalene that, in its damaged and partial form, implies a relationship of particular closeness. The actual text is incomplete, the crucial word obscured by a hole in the manuscript, but what surrounds it has been generating speculation ever since. The Gospel of Truth, attributed to Valentinus himself or to one of his students, reads nothing like the other texts. It is lyrical, it is tender. It describes the condition of human ignorance as a kind of nightmare, a sleep of confusion in which people chase shadows and mistake them for the real. And it describes Gnosis as waking from that nightmare into the warmth of the Father's love. It does not threaten, it does not condemn. It is the most emotionally gentle text in the collection. The thunder, perfect mind is something else entirely. It is a poem, or something like a poem, spoken by a divine feminine voice who describes herself in paradoxes. I am the honored one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. She is understood to be Sophia, or the divine feminine power that Sophia represents, speaking to humanity from both sides of every division that human thought creates. It is one of the most extraordinary pieces of religious writing in any language. The Apocryphon of John, the three steels of Seth, Allogenes, the hypostasis of the archons, the Gospel of the Egyptians, Zostianos, the exegesis on the soul, the trimorphic protonoia, in which the divine voice descends 3 times into the world like a cosmic echo, each time going deeper, each time carrying more of the Pleroma's light into the darkness of matter. 52 texts. A complete world, buried in clay jars, waiting for a farmer who needed fertilizer. For the first 2 centuries of the Common Era, the diversity of Christian thought was enormous. It was messy and contradictory and alive. But as the 2nd century wore on, a faction within the movement began to push for consolidation, for a single creed, for a single interpretation of Scripture, for a single definition of who Jesus was and what he had done. The man who made this his life's work was a bishop named Irenaeus, who led the church at Lyon in what is now southern France from around 177 CE until his death around 202. He was not a man of abstract philosophy. He was an administrator, an organizer, and a strategist. He understood that a movement divided against itself could not survive the pressures of the Roman world, and he identified the Gnostics as the primary threat to unity. He wrote a book. Its full title is Detection and Refutation of Knowledge Falsely So Called, but history knows it as Against Heresies. It is 5 volumes long. It took him years to write. And it is our single richest source of information about Gnostic mythology, because Irenaeus quoted his opponents at length before demolishing their arguments, meaning that some of what we know about Gnostic teaching comes entirely from the man trying to destroy it. His arguments against Gnosticism were several. Some were philosophical. The Gnostic cosmos was impossibly complex, the mythology internally contradictory, the number of aeons and archons and divine emanations of fantasy built on fantasy. Some were scriptural. The Gnostics, he argued, distorted the texts, and read into them meanings they could not support. And some were political and deeply practical. If every believer has direct personal access to divine knowledge, if gnosis is something you experience individually without the mediation of a priest or a bishop, then there is no need for a church hierarchy. There is no need for bishops. There is no need for Irenaeus. This is the part that tends to go unspoken in conventional religious history, but it is crucial. Gnosticism was not merely theologically different from what became Orthodox Christianity. It was structurally incompatible with institutional religious power. You cannot build a centralized church on the foundation of direct personal revelation. The moment you tell people that the divine truth is inside them, and they can access it without a mediator, you have made priests optional. And priests who are optional tend to make themselves mandatory by other means. Irenaeus established the foundational arguments that would be used against Gnostics for the next 2 centuries. He identified 4 and only 4 legitimate gospels. He defined the succession of bishops as the chain of authority that connected the living church to the apostles. He argued that correct belief, which he called orthodoxy, literally straight opinion, was the test of genuine Christianity, and that the Gnostics, with their multiple competing interpretations and their insistence on personal experience over communal creed, had failed that test. What he set in motion did not reach its full force until the 4th century. In 312 CE, the Roman Emperor Constantine saw a vision before the Battle of Milvian Bridge. The exact nature of that vision is disputed, but its consequences are not. Constantine won the battle. He attributed his victory to the Christian God. And for the first time in the history of the Roman Empire, the man at the top of the world's greatest military power was now actively interested in the theology of a formerly persecuted minority religion. Constantine needed Christianity to hold his empire together. He did not need Christianity to be an argument. He needed it to be a creed. He convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, gathering bishops from across the empire to settle, by vote, the questions that had been tearing Christian communities apart for 3 centuries. What exactly was Jesus? How exactly did he relate to the Father? What was the nature of the divine? The council voted. It produced the Nicene Creed, the foundational statement of belief that shaped all subsequent Orthodox Christian theology. It decided what was inside Christianity and what was not. What was not inside included Gnosticism. In the decades following Nicaea, the consolidating church moved with increasing force against texts and communities it deemed heretical. Bishops in Egypt issued formal letters instructing monasteries and churches to destroy texts outside the approved canon. The physical burning of Gnostic books was not everywhere instant and everywhere systematic, but the direction was clear and it was enforced. This is almost certainly why the Nag Hammadi texts were buried. The most widely accepted explanation is that a nearby Pachomian monastery buried the library sometime in the late 4th century, when the Bishop of Alexandria, Athanasius, issued his famous Easter letter of 367 CE listing exactly which books were canonical and ordering all others removed. The monks at Pachomius, rather than destroy texts they valued, sealed them in clay jars and buried them at the foot of Jabal al-Tarif. There they remained for 1,578 years. The destruction of Gnosticism as an organized movement took roughly 2 centuries to complete. By the 5th century, there are almost no references to active Gnostic communities in the Roman world. The texts were burned, the teachers scattered, the communities dissolved. But ideas do not die as cleanly as books. The Mandaeans survived. They are a Gnostic religious community whose origins trace back to the 1st centuries of the Common Era, quite possibly to the same milieu that produced the other Gnostic schools. They revere John the Baptist above all others. They do not accept Jesus as a divine messenger. They have their own cosmology, their own texts, and their own rituals of repeated water baptism. They live today, in the 21st century, primarily in Iraq and Iran, with diaspora communities scattered across Europe, Australia, and North America after the devastation of the Iraq wars. They number somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 people. They are the only Gnostic religious community that has maintained an unbroken tradition from the ancient world to the present day. In medieval France, a movement called Catharism emerged in the 11th and 12th centuries that bore striking structural similarities to Gnosticism, similar enough that historians have argued for generations about whether it represents a genuine survival of Gnostic ideas through the centuries of suppression or an independent reinvention of similar conclusions. The Cathars believed the material world was created by an evil being, that the God of the Old Testament was that being, that souls were trapped in flesh and needed to escape through spiritual purification, and that a class of highly ascetic holy people called the Perfect could guide others toward release from the cycle of rebirth. The Catholic Church launched a crusade against them in 1209 CE. The Albigensian Crusade lasted nearly 20 years. At the town of Béziers, when a crusade commander asked how soldiers could tell Cathar heretics from Catholic faithful in a city of mixed population, a papal legate is reported to have replied, in words that have echoed through history, "Kill them all, and let God sort them out." Whether he said exactly that, Béziers was sacked and its entire population killed. The Cathars were not defeated militarily until 1244, when their last stronghold, the mountain fortress of Montségur, fell. The surviving Perfect were burned en masse. The movement was destroyed within a generation. Gnostic traces exist in Jewish mysticism, in the Kabbalistic tradition's description of the Sephirot and the Ein Sof as an unknowable divine source above the God who interacts with the world. They exist in Sufi Islam's insistence on direct personal experience of the divine over ritual adherence to law. They exist in certain strands of Hindu and Buddhist thought that describe the material world as Maya, illusion, a layer of appearance obscuring a deeper reality. Carl Jung spent a significant portion of his intellectual life working through the implications of Gnostic mythology, arguing that the Gnostic texts were the most complete external expression of the internal psychological dynamics of the unconscious that he had ever encountered. His concept of the shadow, the rejected and denied aspect of the self, maps uncomfortably well onto what Sophia did with the being she produced and rejected. And in 1945, in a field in Egypt, the whole thing surfaced again, wrapped in leather, sealed with bitumen, waiting with the patience of something that has never quite died. Muhammad Ali's story did not end when he carried the jars home. It got stranger. A few weeks after the discovery at Jabal al-Tarif, Muhammad Ali and his brothers were caught up in a blood feud with a man named Ahmed Ismail. They killed him. When Ismail's family came for revenge, Muhammad Ali feared that police searching his home might find the texts and suspect him of further crimes. He gave the bundle to a Coptic priest named Raghib, who sold part of the collection to the Coptic Museum in Cairo. A letter found tucked inside one of the codices became the subject of an international smuggling case. A Belgian antiquities dealer acquired a text and sold it to the Jung Institute in Switzerland, where it sat untranslated for years while scholars argued about who owned it and who had the right to publish it. The politics of the texts consumed as much energy as the texts themselves. The Egyptian government nationalized the collection. A committee was formed to oversee translation. The committee moved slowly. Individual scholars jockeyed for access and credit. A French researcher named Jean Dorès had seen the texts early and published partial descriptions, creating both excitement and jealousy in equal measure. It was not until 1977 that a complete English translation of the Nag Hammadi library was published, 32 years after a farmer in Egypt had smashed open a jar. 32 years. A generation grew up, had children, and grew old in the time between the discovery of the most significant cache of early religious texts in the 20th century and the moment when an ordinary person could sit down and read what was in them. The story of the text's suppression, in other words, did not end in the 4th century. It had a 20th century chapter too. By now, if you have followed this story from the beginning, you understand the broad structure of the Gnostic cosmos. But there is one aspect of Gnostic belief that is easy to miss and, once you see it, impossible to shake. The Gnostics did not believe that the divine spark in humanity was a metaphor. They did not mean it as a nice thought, a way of saying that all people have inherent worth. They meant it literally. There is a fragment of the divine, of the true God above all, inside every human being, not just inside spiritual seekers or enlightened masters, inside everyone. This has an implication that runs directly against the current of most Western religious thought. You are not primarily a sinner in need of redemption. You are not a creature who fell away from God through disobedience and who requires sacrifice and atonement to restore the relationship. You are, at your deepest level, something that was never separate from the divine in the first place. The separation is the illusion. The forgetting is the condition. Gnosis is not a gift God gives you. It is a remembering of what you already are. This is why the Church found Gnosticism so threatening, not just because it challenged the authority of bishops, because it challenged the need for mediation itself. If you already carry the light of the true God inside you, if Gnosis is available to anyone who looks inward with sufficient clarity, then what do you need the Church for? What do you need the priest for? What do you need the sacraments for? The Gnostics would have said, nothing. Find the light. Follow it upward. The path is inside you. And that message, that specific message, is the one thing that every institution built on the mediation of divine access cannot allow, because the moment people believe it, the institution becomes unnecessary. Come back to that moment. Yaldabaoth, the lion-faced serpent, the blind god, raising himself up over his creation and declaring, I am a jealous God, and there is no other God beside me. The Gnostics heard that line and said, look at what jealousy implies. Jealousy is not a quality of the infinite. Jealousy is a quality of the insecure. Jealousy arises when you fear losing something, when you fear comparison, and when you need validation from others because you cannot supply it for yourself. A being of infinite perfection and absolute completeness has nothing to be jealous of. There is no competition for something that is everything. But a being who knows, somewhere in the stolen light that burns at its core, that it is not what it claims to be, that somewhere above the vault of the heavens there is something infinitely greater looking down at it with a mixture of grief and pity, that being might be very jealous indeed. The Gnostics were not naive. They were not trying to be provocative for provocation's sake. They were looking at the world as it actually is, with its earthquakes and its plagues and its children dying in famines and its prayers that go unanswered. And they were asking the only question that the evidence seemed to support. What kind of God made this? Their answer was not no God. Their answer was a lesser one, an anxious one who built this world not from love but from confusion, and who maintains it not from benevolence but from fear. And the compassion of the true God, the infinite, unknowable, non-interfering source of all being, expresses itself not in miracles or commandments, but in the steady, patient work of getting the light back. Sophia's rescue mission, Christ's descent, Gnosis passed from teacher to student. The world is not evil. The world is a mistake. And mistakes can be corrected if you understand what actually happened. No text in the Nag Hammadi library has generated more discussion than the Gospel of Thomas, and the reason is this. It may be older than any of the 4 canonical Gospels. Not certainly, not provably, but the possibility is real enough that it changes the landscape of early Christian history in ways that the mainstream has not fully absorbed. The Gospel of Thomas contains no narrative, no birth, no miracles, no death, no resurrection. It is simply 114 sayings. And when you place those sayings alongside the sayings of Jesus preserved in Matthew and Luke, you find something startling. A significant number of them overlap, often in a form that looks more original, less shaped by later theological development than the versions in the canonical Gospels. Thomas saying 22, when you make the 2 into one, and when you make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, and when you make male and female into a single one, so that the male will not be male nor the female female, then you will enter the kingdom. This is not a gentle householder's wisdom. This is a statement about the nature of division itself, the idea that the opposites created by the Demiurge's world, male and female, inside and outside, upper and lower, are ultimately false, and that recognizing their unity is the act of transformation that restores you to your original state. Thomas saying 3, if your leaders say to you, "Look, the kingdom is in heaven," then the birds of heaven will arrive before you. If they say, "It is in the sea," then the fish will arrive before you. Rather, the kingdom is inside you and outside you. There is nothing here about death and resurrection, about sacrifice and sin, about belief in doctrine and membership in a community. The kingdom is inside you. It is outside you. It is here, available, now, in the moment of recognition. The opening words of the Gospel of Thomas are, "These are the hidden sayings that the living Jesus spoke." The living Jesus, not the crucified Jesus, not the resurrected Jesus, the living Jesus. A Jesus who exists in an ongoing present tense, still speaking, still offering the sayings to anyone who can hear them. That is not a past tense story. That is a present tense invitation. December 1945. A farmer in Egypt smashes a clay jar. What comes out of it is a challenge that has not gone away, not in the 81 years since the discovery, not in the 1500 years since the burial, not in the 1800 years since Irenaeus wrote his refutation. The challenge is not a theological argument, it is a question. It is the question the Gnostics could not stop asking, no matter how many of their books were burned, no matter how many of their communities were scattered, no matter how many centuries of silence were imposed on them. If this world as we find it, with all its suffering and its injustice and its cruelty, is the product of an infinitely good and infinitely powerful God working a perfectly loving plan, then either the suffering is necessary in ways we cannot understand, or our definition of good needs revision, or there is something wrong with the premise. The Gnostics chose the third option. They said the premise is wrong. The being who made this world is not what it claims to be. The true source of being is something so far above and beyond this cosmos that it does not reach into it with commandments and punishments. It reaches into it only with the steady, patient beam of its light, which landed in us when Yaldabaoth breathed into Adam's face and could not keep it, and which has been calling us home ever since. They buried those books because they were dangerous. They were dangerous not because they were wrong. They were dangerous because they were asking the right questions in a world that needed people to stop asking. The books came back. The questions never left. Somewhere in the fragments of divine light that the Gnostics believed are scattered through every human being alive on this earth right now, the argument Sophia started when she reached for what she could not hold is still unresolved. The jar is open. What you do with what is inside it is entirely up to you.